Hello everybody, welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast in association with Future Radio. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by Samuel Seaman and Adam Harvey. I believe this is episode number 500, which means we've done something very special in order to celebrate it. We've gone to Carrow Road, we've watched a game of football, and we've seen Norwich draw 1-1 with Wigan, and we're going to analyse that for you. That's our big special 500th episode surprise, so hopefully it works out okay. We've got plenty to discuss though, in all seriousness. A really frantic game, the first game back at Carrow Road of the new championship season, and of course plenty on the transfer front to discuss as well. Sam, let's come to you first. I mean, as we said, we're sat at Arch and Towers about an hour and a half after the full-time whistle at Carrow Road. What are your reflections on that game first and foremost, but I guess more so the result from a Norwich City perspective?
Well, the result is very disappointing. I don't think you can get around that, really, from championship favourites at home to a club promoted from League One. You can't really get away from a 1-1 draw being a negative result, but I thought there were definitely signs of positivity there. Max Aarons actually spoke about it following the game, about how the team is pleased with the performance, and I thought generally we were pretty pleased with how Norwich got on, and it was the sort of football I want to see and I prefer as a viewer to watch, and it was the first time under Dean Smith that I think we've really properly seen Norwich dominate possession and actually do it with intensity and do it with intent and a desire to go and create chances, and I thought they actually did to a certain extent. We just discussed the number of shots that they've had from outside the box. What was it, 11? Was it?
I think it was 13.
13, yeah. So maybe not totally there with the chance creation, but the performance definitely felt like it was closer to where they want to be. But yeah, as you say, the result, although it's the second game of the season, every game counts as much as any other, and a 1-1 draw against a club that nobody is really expecting to be in and around the playoff fight come the end of the season, it's never going to be good for a team that wants to be promoted.
I know it's all about results at the minute, Adam, and that's football generally. It's all about results. But in the early part of the season, we do place it seems almost like an extra onus on performances than we do perhaps in later stages of the season. I mean, I've got some of the numbers in front of me here, and Sam kind of referenced it. Possession, 70%. Shots, Norwich had 22, only 4 on target, but as we've discussed, 13 of those came from outside the area. 9 corners, an XG of 1.62, so you basically round that up to what would be 2. Wigan, 0.92, which was basically from the 2 chances that they created from Norwich errors. It was an intense, it was quite a purposeful performance. It was an improved performance. Green shoots for you in terms of just the performance on kind of merit?
Yeah, I think particularly that second half, I think Norwich really came out and maybe took the game to Wigan. Obviously they had to, but based on the latter stages of that first half, obviously the first 15 minutes I felt Norwich were very much in control, creating chances and really had Wigan on the back foot. But that sort of period between the 15th minute and I suppose when Wigan got the goal, it just felt like Wigan maybe had that little bit of momentum on their side, and obviously Crawls had to make quite a good save as well to probably deny the game from being 2-0 to Wigan at that point. So I feel like the second half, particularly when they pushed McLean sort of back almost a little bit, in the sense of he sort of dictated the tempo a little bit more from that midfield, and I feel like the changes that Dean Smith made were quite proactive, in the sense that Norwich then really took the game and the onus to try and obviously get the equaliser and then try and push for the winner. So definitely improvements, but I feel like they've got to obviously work on that sort of clinical nature in terms of chance creation and scoring their goal scoring opportunities. Obviously not that they really created a lot of sort of really clear-cut chances today, but obviously you look at that shots total and you feel like with that kind of output, Norwich really should be having more shots on target and therefore scoring more goals and probably putting Wigan to bed and getting 3 points.
Yeah, Pukki hit the bar. I think Max Aarons had one in the first half that flashed across the face of goal. Marcelino Nunez had a shot that just flashed past the far post as well. Pukki had a shot that went past the far post. All of this was in that kind of first half flurry in the opening 15 minutes, apart from the one that hit the bar that was in the second half. So it does feel, Sam, even though, I mean, a lot of the conversations that kind of we've had this week and we've written about this week has been about what Norwich City have done from an attacking perspective. It does feel, when you break down the game, you look at the statistics, we speak about kind of what we saw with our own eyes, it does feel like Norwich created the chances to win this game. It's maybe, as Adam alluded to there, perhaps a lack of ruthlessness when they got in those positions.
Yeah, and I think it's also about the sort of the stage before the finish. It's not always about the actual shot. I think there's a lot of situations where Norwich were in and around the box, and a lot of teams would have been able to create a simple tap in for Tamer Pukki or something like that. And to use an example, Ono Hernandez was a player that impressed me, and I think impressed a lot of Norwich fans today. But he was sort of 8 yards out on 2 occasions, and on neither of those occasions did anything actually come of it, or did Norwich have a sort of clear sight of goal. I think Norwich have to be ruthless in that area when they actually get into the box, finding the opportunity, finding the space to just work at a shot. I don't think they were particularly good at that. The encouraging thing was that they were struggling to even sort of find space in the final third before, and I thought they did better at that. They found players in the box more often than they have before. They found space to cross a lot more than they have, but it's just those final touches in the penalty area that they have to improve upon. And it's both boxes really, and we said that a lot last season during Norwich's best performances when they weren't getting results. We would say better in both boxes, and today it's not only at the attacking end, it's defensively. Once you make that 1 or 2 errors, in the Premier League, let's be frank, they would have conceded 3 or 4 goals based just on individual errors. It's only because they were playing a team like Wigan that they didn't concede more goals. I remember a time Jakob Sorensen got dispossessed and it was pretty much 3-on-1. Pretty poor decision making from Will Keane, and they couldn't finish that off. And Norwich, as structurally sound as they were defensively, I think when you make those sorts of errors, you're always leaving yourself open to being in a bad position, and unfortunately they did that one too many times today.
Yeah, I mean, we'll kind of come back to the goal they conceded, but that was kind of a theme of last season, wasn't it? Particularly towards the back end, a lot of goals they were conceding through individual errors, and it's one of those as a coach, is you can set the team up structurally, you can set them up in and out of possession, but what you can't really accommodate for is individual errors, because they're human beings, they make mistakes, and that is probably the one aspect of football that even the very top coaches can't completely eradicate from their game. I guess from Dean Smith's perspective, it's about perhaps the frequency that they're happening, and this of course isn't just over the 2-game spell, it's over what we saw at the back end of last season as well. Adam, if we start with, we kind of break the game down in periods, because for me there were 3 clear periods of the game. There was what I will label as the first block, in terms of where it felt like Norwich were relentless. It was just a wave of yellow and green. They had possession, they had territory, they were carving out opportunities. The one thing that really lacked from that was a goal. But in terms of general play, and given the conversations that everyone has had about Dean Smith and what a Dean Smith team looks like, this did feel like a major step in the direction in terms of how they started the contest.
Yeah, I think particularly after last week's performance, where they obviously got criticism for maybe lacking that sort of tempo, and obviously they really struggled against a fairly physical Cardiff outfit, and they really took the game to Wigan, who obviously are a little bit similar in the sense they're very physical. You know what you're going to get from them. They're going to try and sit back and probably try and grind out a draw here, and Norwich really took the game to them, which I thought was very encouraging. Obviously the crowd got behind them, and it really felt like the Barkley was trying to whip up and almost sort of force that ball into the back of the net, and I feel like the sort of dynamism maybe from Nunez was very positive very early on. He sort of created that chance for Rashica, and a lot of positive signs from him early doors. I think obviously that midfield is still very much lacking that athleticism that Dean Smith's alluded to, it in the fact that obviously they brought in Isaac Hayden and Gabriel Sara, who obviously both Sara's obviously made his debut in the end, but obviously both not ready for starting action for Norwich City. But because I feel like Sorensen may be a little bit lacklustre in that midfield, obviously a few mistakes. I just don't really feel like he maybe fits what Dean Smith's trying to do, in the sense of pushing that ball forward quick, a little bit of tempo, and obviously he's not really that athletic. And I felt like maybe once that substitution obviously happened in sort of, I suppose, that third period, which we're soon going to talk about, I feel like McLean probably created more and gave Norwich a sort of much superior tempo, and sort of created more opportunities then later on in the game.
Yeah, Sam, that probably lends us nicely onto this, what I'm going to describe as block 2 of the game, which was obviously the mistake that led to Wigan's goal, which was Ben Gibson, who, let's be fair in terms of our analysis and say that he's had a prolonged period on the treatment table. There was definitely some rustiness. We saw him at the end of the game basically signalling that he wanted to come off because of a knock, I presume. But Max Aarons was already making his way round to the tunnel because he'd taken a whack, which I'm sure we're going to discuss in great detail in just a moment in time. But from the moment James McLean's shot hit the back of the net to half-time, Norwich City it felt like a massive sucker punch, not just for the atmosphere, but for Norwich City's performance. Their head drop, and we saw this quite a lot last season when they conceded the goal. What I've often referred to as the Norwich Crumble, where there's almost like this period where everyone just looks a bit confused. Everyone is feeling a little bit sorry for themselves, and it affected their performance probably adversely.
Yeah, I don't know when Dealey's going to add the Norwich Crumble to her menu, but
be flaky in the middle.
Very good, very good. Yeah, I think we saw that a lot last season because, well, it was, in a way, it was a legitimate reaction, wasn't it? Because when Norwich went 1-0 down, they were the worst team in the league, and they knew that it did mean they probably were going to lose. When you see that against Wigan Athletic at home in the Championship, that's when you start to worry, because you know it looks like those mentality issues have sort of bled into this season, and I suppose in a way you can't blame them. They are a group that's got used to losing games, and where are they supposed to get this confidence from? Dean Smith was very open about the fact that he was happy with his squad. He didn't want to make too many changes when he spoke towards the end of last season, and with that, it's not only the technical abilities of the players that you have to keep around, it's the mentality and the sort of overhang from the relegation. And I think that's what we experienced when we saw Wigan score against Norwich, was just that same familiar feeling of there it goes, there's the goal that Norwich are used to conceding and then just sort of tailing off in the game. It was worrying because the intensity that they displayed in the first sort of 15-20 minutes was the opposite of what we're used to seeing recently, and it felt like maybe those issues had started to recede a little bit, and there'd been a freshness and an energy to the squad that we hadn't seen for a while. So the fact that they took it as such a sucker punch was worrying. I think in that sense Smith will be delighted that his side managed to get a goal back and obviously make it 1-1, and we'll obviously come on to that part of the play, but I think had that not been the case and had this second period dragged out until the final whistle, there would have been serious concerns over are Norwich going to ever be able to come back from a 1-0 lead, not a 1-0 trailing 1-0, because that was a real problem for them last season, and I think those worries would have developed. So yeah, the fact that they got that goal is really important for their mentality going forward, but I can understand why they reacted in the way they did, given what they're used to in recent times.
Yeah, it was like old wounds, wasn't it? You look at the team and beyond. Again, we kind of had this debate last week, really, but beyond Marcelino Nunez, obviously you could probably make a case for Todd Cantwell as well, maybe not having some of the baggage because he was out on loan. Omobamidele was obviously injured, but beyond that was a core of the side who were involved in that Premier League relegation, which is probably why it felt so fresh, I guess, but also for the supporters, I felt, because Carrow Road was quite frustrated at that point, and understandably so because of the nature of Norwich's performance, but it felt like a lot of it was because of what they'd seen last season. They'd seen a team before who conceded a goal, who went into their shells a little bit, who crumbled, and it did kind of feel like a sort of a continuation of a theme, really. But fortunately, Adam, they came out in the second half. I think in the opening 10 seconds, Milo Rashica had a shot at Ben Amos, which he saved pretty comfortably. But it almost set the tone and kind of got everyone back up, ready for it again. And when the players responded, the fans responded. What did you make of kind of what I'm going to label as the third block, that second half performance? Because in terms of pushing, not just for an equaliser, but also for a winning goal late on, it felt like, beyond what Sam said, and also Dean Smith felt, that they probably didn't create the quality of chances that he would want. But in terms of possession and territory and the chances they served up, they probably had enough in that second period to walk away with all 3 points.
Yeah, they definitely should have won the game. Obviously, there's the decision, a few penalty decisions towards the end that looked like, on the face of it, based on Dean Smith's comments. Obviously, we can see there's a bit of a gash on Max Aaron's legs. It looks like that probably should have been a penalty. It looks like it, based off the replay and obviously the pictures that we've seen. So, but yeah, Norwich obviously maybe didn't, again, as you just sort of alluded to, they don't really create the chances that are clear cut. But obviously, once Aaron's gets that equaliser, I really felt that Carrow Road was maybe all the seats were kind of, fans were back off their seats and really behind the team, and that sort of atmosphere that we maybe haven't seen for Carrow Road probably since pre-COVID, really, because last season was so dire, and obviously most games Norwich were behind, and maybe that atmosphere just got really, really flat. It just really sort of rejuvenated the players, and I really felt like they went for it. Ono Hernandez, I feel like that was a really inspired substitution. Obviously, maybe again lacking that little bit of quality in the final third to sort of find the man in the box, but in terms of just, he really gave Darikra, however you pronounce that, a fullback a sort of a bit of a headache in the way that he just kept taking the ball to him, getting to the byline, and obviously trying to find his man in the box. So it feels like that, if that's what Norwich City are going to be this season, then there might be a little bit of excitement, because obviously a lot of fans, is still sort of that Daniel Farke element that's sort of clouding over the Norwich City sort of Twitter space and social media space at the moment, obviously in the way that the football was so progressive, and Norwich were, I suppose as fans, that's what you want to see. You want to see a team that's attacking and scoring goals, and maybe that's something that Dean Smith's sides haven't really had. But I feel like if Norwich can create those sort of levels of chances in terms of creation, but arguably better quality, then obviously we'll see more goals, and that obviously is ultimately what you want to see as a football fan, and hopefully Norwich can get more 3 points on the board this season if they continue to do that.
Yeah, I actually felt Onel Hernandez probably personified Norwich a little bit, in the sense he was energetic, he looked improved from the last time I saw him, but also probably lacked a little bit of quality in the final pass, which is probably something that you could say about Norwich City as well. But Dean Smith described him after the game as being the best trainer in the week, so and he feels he's pushing himself in the right direction for a start. He's likely to get one against obviously the club he was on loan at in midweek, Birmingham City in the Cup. Sam, I really loathe to make this conversation about officials and about referees, partly because I think a lot of the time it's quite boring. But when there's an incident in the game of the magnitude of the one that we had today, in terms of that challenge from Tom Naylor on Max Aarons in the box, which I have to say, I'm struggling to sum it up in a better way than Dean Smith did, in terms of, just felt absolutely ludicrous to me that tackle, the force of the tackle, the height of the tackle, the way he goes in with his studs up. How on earth Norwich City haven't been awarded a penalty off the back of that is pretty mesmerising, really, for the wrong reasons. And I think if that tackle's made anywhere else on the pitch, it's a foul. It's definitely a yellow card. I think it's most likely a red card. I mean, I've got the definition for serious foul play in front of me here. There's two parts to it. So the first part says a tackle or challenge that endangers the safety of an opponent or uses excessive force must be sanctioned as serious foul play. Any player who lunges at, this is probably the more crucial bit in terms of today's incident, any player who lunges at an opponent in challenging from the ball, from the front, from the side or from behind, using one or both legs with excessive force or endangers the safety of an opponent, is guilty of serious foul play. Notice in that definition, the phrase "got the ball" isn't part of it. It's completely irrelevant. Doesn't matter. That's a penalty, isn't it? And if it's not a penalty, I'm quite scared for what this season holds for Norwich City, because we saw. I mean, you interviewed Max Aarons afterwards. He had to go off because he had a gash on his knee. I mean, if that's not endangering the safety of an opponent, then I really don't know what is.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking when you were reading out that definition, and I think I heard some pundit saying,
let's name him, because it was Don Goodman on Sky Sports, right? It's nonsense what he says, right? Let's be honest. I think he described it as a coming together.
He said maybe the referee's seen it as a coming together because it's one of those where if you make that challenge, you have to end up doing that to Max Aarons if you want to win the ball. Well,
his argument was that there's nowhere that Tom Naylor could have put his leg.
Yeah,
basically.
And what I would say to that is, don't make the tackle then. If there's nothing you can do.
But it also sorry to interrupt again. It also shows he's not in control of that tackle.
Well, yeah, exactly. If you don't know where your leg's going to go, and the risk you take is that you cut Max Aarons' leg open. You've got to be thinking that you can't go into that challenge, and that's the whole point behind red cards. Red cards aren't there, and as exciting as they are for us as media to talk about and for fans to watch and debate over, they're not there to create drama. They're there to stop people getting hurt, and the idea long term is that if you see enough players making tackles like that and getting red cards, you don't do what the Wigan player did today, and you don't make that challenge. So I think, yeah, you're right, it sets a dangerous precedent, and it's just a shame because, you know, as you said, we're loath to talk about refereeing decisions instead of a football game, but the reality is this group of players spent, you know, five days preparing for this football match, and they should have had a much greater opportunity. They earned a much greater opportunity to win the football match than they actually got. And it's just kind of frustrating when, you know, we spend the whole week building up to it, and Norwich fans spend the whole week looking forward to it. You know, same on the Wigan side as well. For somebody's poor decision to have such an enormous say compared to the actual footballing abilities of any of the players and the decision making of any of the players, I think is a real shame. But we've all seen Championship refereeing before, and I think it's not the first, and it certainly won't be the last. And we're probably going to be sat on this podcast 3 or 4 times at least between now and the end of the season, talking about a refereeing decision, and probably a poor refereeing decision that's changed the outcome of the game, and that should never be the case. You know, this is a real high professional level, and referees should never be the discussion point at that level. And it's probably a whole different podcast discussing how they can address those issues. But I think it's clear to anyone that's had to watch a lot of that EFL refereeing that something needs to be done to improve the standard across the board, really.
Yeah, and it's easy to say, oh, well, just put VAR in the Championship and it'll be fine. Well, we already saw from the playoff final at the end of last season that's not the case, when Huddersfield should have had 2 pretty stonewall penalties that weren't given with VAR in place, particularly around what are largely considered subjective calls. But, I mean, the fact that the referee, Matthew Donoghue, has such a great position of this, and he's basically looking at it square on. I don't really understand what he's seen or what he hasn't seen in order to not give that as a penalty. And, you know, also I think it's worth saying, and we've already spoken about this in the opening 22 minutes of this podcast, it's not the reason why Norwich didn't win the game as well. And that's important to say. We've kind of analysed maybe what their attacking play still lacked, even though it was probably improved, and that some of the quality of the chances they created weren't there. So, as Sam quite rightly says, it's not the fact, Adam, that this decision went against them that means they haven't walked away with 3 points today. It's the fact that this foul, which it was, probably a red card in my opinion as well, certainly going by the definition of the serious foul play law, probably robbed them of an opportunity that was just for them to win the game, which is probably the bigger point here.
Yeah, I feel like obviously any team that, you know, has a decision that feels like that, you know, it's gone against Norwich, and obviously in the wider context of Norwich City and their season, obviously they are trying to get over that hangover from last season, and you just feel like they need that first 3 points on the board to maybe kickstart their season and really kick on. I feel like a lot of people probably in the media space, but also the fan base this week, have probably been saying this is quite a big game. You know, there's obviously that little bit of expectation maybe that Norwich should be beating a team like Wigan, and that's no disrespect to Wigan, but obviously they were a League One outfit last year that were playing the likes of Morecambe, and Norwich were, you know, playing Manchester City and Liverpool. So it just felt like Norwich needed to get that win, and then maybe they obviously had that opportunity then in the week with the cup game just to maybe get the likes of Gabriel Sara some minutes, and then really go to Hull, sort of riding a bit of momentum and obviously a little bit of positivity back in the camp. And it just feels like maybe that penalty decision, obviously just getting a draw at home to Wigan, has maybe sort of bled a bit of negativity back into the fan base. So I feel like, yeah, those levels of decisions need to be improved across the board. I mean, obviously every Championship club is going to have some decisions go against them this season. Obviously it all levels itself out somehow or other over the course of the season, but it just feels like maybe at the end of the season, if Norwich miss out on something, on a few points, then you look back on decisions like this still and you go, well, if that was given as a penalty, then this could have been the outcome. So yeah, it's disappointing, and obviously you can't blame just that decision on Norwich not winning the game. They had enough opportunities to score more goals, and they obviously lacked that bit of quality in the final third. So that's, you know, by no means is that, you know, the only thing, but there's a lot of other questionable decisions in that game, let alone from the penalties from the referee. So yeah, it just needs to be improved.
Yeah, so someone knew it was our 500th podcast appearance because there seems to be an ice cream van outside. Either that or someone's got a very big, what do you call them? They're like musical boxes, aren't they? The ones that you twist and they, maybe it's just me. But I'll read you some of Dean Smith's quotes on that. You can watch all of his reaction on our YouTube page. That's up there now. He said it was a scandalous decision and a scandalous tackle that should have resulted in a penalty and a red card. Max is okay, but he's got a gaping wound in his left shin, which I think was slightly exaggerated. But that tells you everything. He then went on to say, because it was put to him afterwards that Naylor got to the ball first, he said it certainly was an excuse when I played. If you went over the top, even when you won the ball, you were off. I haven't seen any of the other penalty calls back, neither have I at this stage, but none of them really looked like they had any particular merit, if I'm being honest. But that was the one that his analyst was keen to show him. He then went on to add, just finally, again, I'm quoting him here, why aren't referees mic'd up so we can get a breakdown of why they are making the decisions that they make? He's looking straight down the barrel of that one, and it worries me if he doesn't see that as a bad tackle. And I would concur.
We live Norwich City. The build-up. The passion. The drama. The last-minute winners. The debate. That's why we've created PinkUn Plus. The app that takes you beyond the headlines.
With exclusive columns, blogs, podcasts and videos, we've got you covered.
Subscribe today. PinkUn Plus. Stay ahead of the game.
Download now on the App Store and on Google Play. Okay, well, I guess the other point to mention, Sam, from the game is the very concerning sight that we had in the second half. It was pretty much in front of us where we sit in the press box of Dimi Nunez, who went down just in front of the Wigan dugout. It was after kind of this was a coming together, not someone trying to break someone's leg, and he got his kind of trailing foot caught between the player whose name escapes me at this moment in time, might have been Duriqua, and the turf, and his foot kind of drags. It's really uncomfortable. It goes in a position that feet shouldn't go in. It's quite horrendous. You could see how bad it was immediately. He just burst out in tears. He had to be administered with I'm sure there's probably doctors out there who will tell me that it wasn't gas and air, but what looked like to me gas and air. And his leg was kind of wrapped up in these, I don't know what you described them as, really. It was bright orange kind of padding, wasn't it? And he was then put on a stretcher and stretchered off. Before we kind of talk about the incident, I think it's important to give credit to Liam Richardson, the Wigan manager, who got play stopped pretty quickly, so he could receive treatment. And of course we wish Dimi Nunez well. But in terms of a footballing perspective, if, as we expect, this keeps him out for quite a prolonged period of time, and we hope, of course, that it doesn't. Dean Smith said after the game that he's got to go to hospital to have an X-ray, which for me would immediately thinks break, which is a concern. But he said it could be an X-ray or a scan. But the fact he has to go to hospital to get it assessed is not looking particularly great. What does this mean for Norwich from a footballing perspective? Because Nunez and Sam McCallum, who came on and did okay in his cameo, quite different fullbacks. So given what we've kind of spoken about stylistically and the way Norwich City attacked, does it change the way that Norwich City have to play or have to think about how they build play up down that left-hand side if Dimi Nunez is out for any prolonged period of time?
Not really. I think McCallum is still one that likes to get forward. His attacking side is probably better than his defensive side, and that's a similar situation to Nunez. The main problem for me, well, the two problems really are the quality. I don't dislike Sam McCallum as a footballer by any stretch, but he's clearly not to the same level as a £7 million Greek fullback who's really impressed Norwich fans pretty much throughout his career, and also cover-wise they don't have anything other than Sam McCallum really, unless they want to include Sam Byram, which, well, I'd suggest that was a stretch given his injury issues, but Smith clearly believes he's an able deputy at right back, otherwise they wouldn't have sent Ballymumba out on loan. So maybe they do see Byram as a genuinely reliable left back option, and in that case they wouldn't need to dip into the transfer market. But I'd be sceptical with that, and I'd say if Nunez is out for an extended period of time, dipping into the transfer market, most likely the loan market is probably something Norwich fans can expect. But yeah, I don't know if you'd need to change too much about the team's sort of structure. They have maybe slightly different skill sets, but I think mentality wise, there's not much that McCallum would need to adapt to in order to fill that role that Nunez does, and that's a strength that Norwich have in that area that they don't necessarily have in other areas on the pitch. For example, if you look at that right back situation, which I spoke about, Max Aarons and Sam Byram are totally different fullbacks, and in that situation, if Aarons was injured and you had to rely on Byram, you would have to change that setup and look for creativity from different areas, because Byram isn't going to be getting into the box and looking to cross and link up with Teemu Pukki like Aarons does. But no, at left back, I think they're probably similarly minded enough and in a slightly less important position with regards to the setup, that they can probably not change that too much, to be honest.
Great, that's all the left backs listening who've turned off now. Adam, I'm going to come to you on Marcelino Nunez. It was his Norwich City debut, but also been quite the week for him. He started it as a Catholic. You're going to have to remind me how to say this.
Católica.
There we go, a Católica player, where he played in their game last Saturday night, wasn't it? UK time, about 11 o'clock. We were still on the road back from Cardiff at that point, but no one cares about that. He ended it, Wednesday. He obviously, after that game, flew over to the UK to kind of finalise his move to Norwich. That was confirmed on Wednesday evening. Come Saturday, he's in the starting lineup, thrust into it really, in a number 10 position. Dean Smith described him as the catalyst for that opening, what he felt was half an hour. I'd probably say 20-25 minutes. But it did feel like there was kind of a fizzle, which perhaps was probably natural given the week he had. But how impressed were you with him? And I guess how much of a kind of insight into perhaps what we can expect from him in the weeks ahead did that performance offer?
Yeah, I thought particularly that first 15-20 minute sort of opening period, I thought he was really impressive. Dean Smith labelled him as a bundle of energy in the pre-match press conference yesterday, and I feel like that's pretty much hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what he was. He's sort of a little bit dynamic, picks up the ball, always sort of looking forwards, which I think is maybe a criticism of some of the other Norwich midfielders of the past. Someone like a Les Malou maybe, who's a little bit sideways or backwards. I feel like Nunez was he's quite aware of where other players are on the pitch. I mean, sort of that run for Rashica to find him. He looks like quite a creative, got a bit of creative flair about him, which I suppose is natural, being he's a South American. That's probably what you'd come to expect. And I feel like there's something really exciting there. I mean, the Norwich crowd seemed to get behind him, and there was a few periods where he lost the ball a bit cheaply, but I think obviously that's going to take time. He's obviously got the adaptation from coming from a very sort of possession-based I suppose level in terms of the Chilean league to facing Wigan, which is probably, they're very notoriously a championship side in the fact they're quite big and physical, so it's going to take a little bit of time to adapt for him. But I think, once you maybe get him in that sort of team and settled, I mean, there's definitely sort of glimmers of, positives from him. And I feel like once you get him and maybe Gabriel Sara in that sort of team, and Dean Smith maybe has those athletic midfielders that he's been sort of chiming on about now for sort of ever since he really came into the club, I feel like, then hopefully Norwich can create a lot more chances, and that build-up play from getting the ball from defence into those attacking areas will be much more quicker. And if he can continue to sort of create those sort of levels of chances and sort of maintain those levels of passing that we saw he has in his locker, then there's definitely a player to work with there. And obviously he's still only 22 as well, so there's going to be a lot more progress in his Norwich City career as well. And if they can really work on sort of his skills on the training pitch, then I think he's only going to get better with time.
There was a moment in the second half where I'm not sure if it was Tom Naylor or Max Power, because they're both quite big, but one of them, he was trying to control the ball that was coming over his head and it was bouncing, and he got completely sort of shoulder barged off it. And at that point I thought, he's just understood what the Championship's all about. But Sam, just on Nunez, from your perspective, what did you make of his opening performance? Because there was a lot good, faded out of it a little bit, a couple of cheap concessions, but as a debut, were you impressed by him?
Yeah, I really liked his technique. I thought he was very watchable and my sort of footballer. And I thought he was pretty encouraging. The adaptability was something I was looking out for, and I don't think he looked particularly out of place. Obviously, Adam referenced that, or you referenced that scenario, and I think that was a sort of welcome to the Championship moment. But he didn't have maybe as many of those as you'd associate with somebody coming from a completely different league. But it is a tough league, and there's actually a piece on the PinkUn Plus app about the sort of tough upbringing that he's had and come through, and I wasn't particularly surprised to see him standing up to the physical battle a lot of the time. To contrast that sort of physical encounter with I think Max Power, there was a time when he actually charged back and halted a counter attack and intercepted the ball from somebody much bigger. Well, but anyone from the Wigan team qualifies really, and I think that was encouraging, and he adapted better than I think most were, and better than a lot of sort of South America, better than a lot of people thought somebody from South America would. I'm not going to compare him to
Don't do it. That is so easy to do it. Don't do it. Don't tie yourself to it.
No, but I thought he does look more like the sort of creative number 10 type, and that moment, that chipped ball through to Rashica, who then tried to lob the goalkeeper, it was almost a relief for me to see that, to be honest, because they're so lacking in those sorts of players that can see those sorts of passes and come up with those slightly alternative ideas. That I was really pleased to actually see somebody try something like that, and I think he could be a big player for Norwich moving forward.
Yeah, it's hard to put it into words, but sometimes when I'm watching a footballer and they do something I like, or make a pass that I like, it's just I just go, oof, and it's hard to put that into what that represents in words. But there were a couple of times that ball over to Rashica. There was also another lovely one, which I think was to Nunez when he switched the play. That was a moment, and hopefully he can continue to produce a few of those. But certainly encouraged by him. We also saw Gabriel Sara probably. I think he came on with about all of stoppage time, but not much really to make any kind of real impact. He's obviously been out for a little bit of time as well, so he will have to get up to speed. I would expect him to be involved against Birmingham in midweek. Probably no surprise really that Nunez was ahead of him. It's going to be interesting to see what he brings when he does it, but really interesting to see the contrast. You didn't say his name, I'll say it. Emi Buendia, when he was at the club, not for those reasons, I'm not making any comparisons, don't worry, but when he came to the club, the bedding in period that he was afforded by Daniel Farke was probably a few months really. I don't think it was really until November that we started to see him, maybe slightly earlier, but a lot of his appearances were off the bench. He was kind of sort of gently pushed into it rather than fully thrust into it, and it feels like that approach this time under Dean Smith is going to be completely different for the two South American guys who feel like they're going to be thrown in. What else do I want to mention? I did want to speak about Onel Hernandez a little bit, because we've kind of touched upon the positive cameo. There was a nice moment that people who weren't in the ground would have seen, that he was warming up, and he's obviously got his Norwich City tattoo on his left arm. He showed that to the Barclay and the Snake Pit obviously got a very good response. But he came on and like we've spoken about, Adam, I've kind of said, perhaps rather harshly, that he for me kind of epitomised Norwich's overall performance. Energetic, but maybe that final pass wasn't quite there. But that's what we've associated with Onel Hernandez since he's been at the club, really. So, and this is a big if, because we've used this if a lot around Onel Hernandez. But if he can get that last bit right, then everyone knows what he's capable of, particularly at this level. It's quite some weapon to have for Norwich City off the bench.
I think, particularly if you sort of look at that spell that he had at Birmingham at the back end of last season, so they were very disappointed that they couldn't get him back in some capacity, whether that had been a loan or a permanent move. So I think especially when he's got that connection with the Norwich fans, which is so strong, obviously, he's obviously got that tattoo, and it was a great moment, and I really felt like actually that was almost one of the catalysts just to get the crowd back on side, and that kind of level of connection with a player, that's going to only be encouraging if he can then produce the levels of output and actually contribute in terms of goals and assists for Norwich, because ultimately that's been a criticism of a lot of wide players of Norwich City sort of in the past few seasons, is maybe they've got that little bit of energetic spark, they maybe get bums off seats, but effectively when it comes to that sort of really crucial point where you're looking for that man in the box or maybe getting that shot away, they maybe just haven't got that sort of clinical edge. So I feel if Dean Smith can sort of mould on a Hernandez and make him a a contributor in terms of goals and assists, then yeah, he's definitely someone that I wouldn't be surprised to see more in the starting 11 towards the further as we go on to the more games coming up in sort of these latter stages of August. I think he'll definitely be more likely to be there with a start than maybe what I'd have had sort of maybe a few weeks back, where you still looked at the likes of Jolis and that was still on the books, and you feel like maybe someone like that was maybe ahead of Hernandez. Obviously, he was sent out on loan last season twice, so to come back and contribute would be a huge benefit to Norwich. And if he can really kick on and take that momentum, and obviously wants to play for Norwich, we all know that. He loves this area, he loves his club, so fingers crossed for him, and for Dean Smith, that they've got a player there that can contribute and towards hopefully some success.
Yeah, he's got an extra space on his tattoo at the bottom for another year, so it'd be good to get that fully filled in. Although I don't know if he needs to get an updated version because the badge has changed or not. I'm not sure. My only thing, and I'm being really uber critical, and it's not a criticism on El Hernandez, even though it might sound like it, is I'm not quite sure what it says about Norwich City's squad, the fact that he has come back having been deemed previously not to have been good enough and looks so close to their starting 11 at the moment. That's the only thing that I would say, and it's probably not just him, it's probably the same for Jordan Hugill and probably Danel Sanani as well. So that's one to watch with interest. Sam, he's got lost a little bit, but Norwich made a signing on Friday night. They're fourth for the window, a loan, another midfielder, Aaron Ramsey, not that one, joins from Aston Villa on loan, a player that Dean Smith knows well. He spoke on Friday, and we've spoken a lot, not just probably boring people really, not just today, not just in the pod last week, not just throughout pre-season, also last season as well, about this lack of creativity point because of the departure of you-know-who. What do you make of it? Because it's interesting. He's a 19-year-old. He's played a couple of games in terms of senior level for Aston Villa. I think one in the Carrow Road Cup against Barrow. I'm not sure he's made too many of that. He's been on the bench a couple of times in the Premier League. He was pushed up into the first team by Dean Smith when he was Aston Villa manager. Got a lot of exposure in pre-season last summer. He spent the end of last season on loan at Cheltenham Town in League One between January and May. Obviously, we didn't see him close hand because we were too busy watching Norwich City's brilliant Premier League campaign. But the reviews of that spell has been quite mixed. 14 appearances and 1 goal. He's an England youth international. It's an interesting signing, and that's before we've kind of watched the lad play and can fully assess him.
Yeah, there's a few factors that are encouraging and a few that are quite worrying. He's a player that Dean Smith is clearly trusts and spoke about being excited about. He spoke about him and Craig Shakespeare actually sort of seeing a lot of potential in him. But there's also these worries about sort of a lack of experience, and he's not had rave reviews for a spell at a club which failed to achieve promotion from League One. So it feels quite strange that he would get a loan move right to the top of the Championship, and that's where Norwich want to be. The number of Aston Villa fans saying "great move" was almost slightly worrying. When you sign a loan player, you almost want the fans of the parent club to sort of wonder why he's gone there, because that would suggest he's close to their sort of level. And the fact that him going to Norwich as a surprise maybe isn't a good thing. But on our Team News Live video earlier today, I used the example of Christoph Zimmermann, who I don't think had played a game above the regionalised fourth division in Germany, that level. And Daniel Farke brought him in because he trusted him, and he ended up being a very key player in a fantastic promotion for Norwich. So, there is evidence of coaches maybe seeing things at close quarters that we're unable to look at from stats or opinion of fans at clubs he's been at previously. And that's obviously the hope for Norwich fans. I think in terms of the type of signing, it's encouraging. Obviously, they're piling on the midfielders this summer, but not all of them are bona fide number 10s, and Ramsey appears to be the absolute epitome attacking midfielder. Not necessarily so concerned with the defensive nature. He wants to get into the box, he wants to make assists, and he wants to score goals, and Norwich need assists and goals from somewhere other than Tamer Pukki desperately, and they have for some time. So if he can help ease that burden, it'll be fantastic. But I do also totally understand concerns, and I have some of my own, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I did put the inexperienced point to Dean Smith in the press conference after the game, to which he just replied, asked the Cheltenham manager, he's referring to Michael Duff, who's now at Barnsley, whether he would wanted him back this season. I think he made those quotes publicly saying he would, because of what he saw in training, and maybe this ability to do things that other players he had in his ranks couldn't. And he was playing in a Cheltenham side that I think it was his first ever season in the third tier that managed to survive, which is a magnificent achievement from their standards, but they weren't necessarily the prettiest to watch, as they perhaps wouldn't be in their circumstances. So maybe there's an argument from his perspective that he was playing in a team that maybe didn't particularly suit him. What do you make of this one, Adam? Because as Sam said, it's interesting to look at from the outside because of this perceived jump that maybe he's taking. He won the FA Youth Cup with Aston Villa. I think Liam Bramley who's of course first team coach at Norwich, was part of the coaching staff. Dean Smith clearly likes him. Craig Shakespeare clearly likes him. Norwich have a lot of players in that position. We saw Nunez there today. Todd Cantwell played there last weekend. Daniel Sinani in that role. Not all of them are going to be able to play in the same team. It does feel like there's a lot of options for that area now, but it probably says maybe a lot about what Dean Smith perceives to be the lack of creativity, the fact that he's gone in and signed a player that he knows and rates very highly from his former club.
Yeah, I was actually looking at his statistics last night. I was making the graphics for our socials, and I went onto Y-Scout to look at his statistics across the board. And I think it's 15 appearances for Cheltenham, just the one goal. But it was a really well taken goal against, I believe it was Bolton. He really sort of beat quite a few men and sort of cut inside and put the ball in the side of the net. I think it was the left hand side. So if you can sort of get that from him and put that into the Championship, then there's definitely a player there. I suppose different positions, but a little bit like when Ollie Skip came to Norwich, he was a bit of an unknown quantity. Never really played any senior football, and everyone was a bit like, maybe when he sort of was in that starting 11 for that game at Huddersfield, we're like, we don't really know what to expect from this guy. But I think you could probably tell from the outset that there was a real talent in there, and he sort of, I suppose Daniel Farke nurtured him over the course of the season to the point where he ended up being, arguably, if it wasn't for the quality of Wendia in the Championship or Timu Pukki in the Championship, then he was a Norwich City Player of the Season candidate. So obviously very different players, very different styles, but I think the fact that Dean Smith knows him as well, has seen him, and obviously knows let's face it, he's not going to be bringing him to the club if there's not something there that's Championship worthy. So hopefully that's an added benefit. I suppose there's always the argument that's going to come from a lot of Norwich fans. Is it just a case of Dean Smith almost helping out Aston Villa? Obviously we've seen the likes of Jolis been sent out on loan. Obviously we've got Springett and Rowe that are Norwich City Academy products themselves. Obviously Flynn Clark as well, who's been sent out to Walsall. And I suppose the argument is there that Norwich may be stifling the progression of those younger talents that they have in their own academy to almost help out Aston Villa in terms of this kid who's a bit unknown. But ultimately, to me, it's a bit of a risk-free signing. Obviously, he's coming on loan. He's not going to be on major wages or anything. It's not like Norwich have spent big in terms of a loan fee either. Not for comparing it to the likes of a Gilmore last season, where there was obviously a lot of money attached to that deal. So fingers crossed he can produce. Obviously, no doubt he'll get an opportunity in the Cup this week, and I believe his debut actually came in the Carrow Road Cup for Aston Villa against Barrow. So it's a competition that he knows as well. So the pressure will be off in that one as well. So fingers crossed that he can produce something, and Norwich have got another real sort of a creative attacking output there that they can benefit from going forwards in the season.
Yeah, his brother is Jacob Ramsey, who scored a very impressive goal at Carrow Road last year in Aston Villa's 2-0 win here, where half the Norwich team was out with COVID and the rest of it was pretty ill on the night, I think. So it was difficult to really judge anything into that, but he kind of said in his quotes in the club official media that he did last night that he felt Dean Smith could almost emulate what he did in terms of Jacob's progression with him, and that I suppose is a positive sign. I think it's an interesting one you make about kind of the stifling of various players' progression, because that's been something that Norwich City have been quite keen to avoid in the past. For example, I know that there was a lot of frustration in hindsight about the Ben Marshall deal when they signed that, knowing that they had Max Aarons in the background waiting to come through, and there's been a few kind of situations like that. So it's quite interesting that Dean Smith has obviously taken a judgment of what he has, both in terms of first team and young players, because he had a look at pretty much all of them in pre-season, and obviously felt that Aaron Ramsey comes in at a higher level than what those guys are at the minute. That's very interesting in terms of judgment, and we'll have to obviously wait and see until we see him play whether that judgment is the correct one or not. Worth saying as well, he's got quite the competition at Aston Villa in terms of those positions. Philippe Coutinho, Emi Buendia, of course, just two names there, but we could go on really in terms of Leon Bailey, etc. Just to close the pod really then, I thought we'd look ahead to Birmingham. Norwich obviously host them on Tuesday night in the cup tie that everyone is licking their lips looking forward to. Absolutely, it's going to be absolutely quality, isn't it? An all-championship affair. Obviously Shemelhalf Poeta won't play, I presume anyway. No one's told me any differently, but that tends to be the rule with lone players. Who are you going to be looking for, Sam, in terms of, because we're going to expect a heavily rotated Norwich team, who are you going to be looking for in that team potentially to really, I suppose, make their case for a start of what will be Hull next weekend?
It's difficult to say really, because a lot of the fringe players have now found themselves thrust into a situation where they sort of have to play. You know, if Isaac Hayden was fit right now, you'd be saying a similar situation about Jakob Sorensen. You'd be saying Sam McCallum if Dimitris Yunus hadn't obviously suffered that injury today, and it's quite difficult. So I think a lot of people will be looking forward to seeing the signings. I think of the four, Ramsey certainly has the most to prove, maybe not to Dean Smith, but to the outside, outside the Norwich bubble and outside, internally at the club. I think he has the most to prove. So I'll be watching him with keen interest. I'm sure everybody of a yellow and green persuasion will be keenly watching Gabriel Sara, who you'd expect to feature, given he's not played a competitive match apart from 10 minutes today since April, I don't think. So yeah, it's going to be more those top end players who are going to be trying to bridge the gap between no football and playing in the league than it is those sort of fringe players. Maybe Daniel Sinani. They have, although we did say they found it easier to get in and around the box today, they have only scored one goal in 2 games, and they have amassed an XG that's less than 2. So there is still space for improvement in the creative department, and I think Sinani will hope that he can add to that, because with the number of names they've now added, it doesn't look like he's going to get too many opportunities if he gets it wrong. So this could be one of not too many chances to prove that he's up to that level. So I think it could be a big night for him. Angus Gunn can certainly put pressure on Tim Krul, given the two's varying performances over the last few months. So there's a couple of names in there, but I think as boring as it is, I'm going to be mainly looking out for those sort of big name signings.
Yeah, Gabriel Sara, I think the interesting one from my perspective, if he gets onto the pitch and plays. Adam, we've done 500 pods of this. Not us, not just us, because that would be quite something. But as a show, this is now the 500th episode, which in cricketing terms means we have to lift a bat 5 times. I'm not sure what the podcast equivalent of that is. Possibly don't want to know either. But doing this podcast is always quite interesting, because we kind of do them in varying ways. So sometimes we'll come from Carrow Road after a game, usually on a Saturday. Obviously today it was a lunchtime, but usually at 3:00, and we'll come and record the pod pretty immediately afterwards. So there's an element of rawness to it. For away games, we tend to push it into Sunday and kind of do it remotely. I guess how interesting do you find recording this pod more generally, and kind of, I don't want to ask why it's been so successful, because I feel like we're kind of beating ourselves up really, but 500 episodes, that's mad.
That is pretty crazy. I remember listening to sort of the early ones just as a teenager, getting a little bit of Norwich City insight, and here we are on the 500th episode, and I'm sat here in the wonderful city of Norwich at Archant Towers.
In the Montserrat room.
In the Montserrat room of all places as well. And we even have an ice cream van in the background for most of this podcast. So it's been quite the day and quite the podcast. 90% of this is usually waffle. So, I mean, for most people that are listening, fair play to you that you listen to us, particularly sort of in those difficult periods like last season. I think, I'm much more hopeful that I can be on more positive podcasts this year, because last year some of them were pretty tough. I remember one coming back from Southampton away, a Saturday afternoon. We me, you, Paddy and Dave were sat in the car outside Birch Hanger Services.
We were, yeah.
And I just think back to moments like that and think, this is what the podcast is all about. It's raw. It's we're all of us sat in here are Norwich fans as well, so we're passionate about the club. So to talk about them and just sort of dissect the little elements is really enjoyable. And the fact that we have thousands of people listen to us does blow my mind, because it's just Norwich City Football Club at the end of the day. But thanks for, I suppose, everyone's continued support, and obviously let's hope there's going to be another 500 going forward.
Yes, absolutely. Sam, just to close, really, I mean, the same really. 500 pods is quite something. As we said, we haven't been on all of them. Worth obviously crediting the people who have. Obviously, David Freezer, who's still at Archant in a different role. Michael Bailey, of course, who hosted it before that. We've had several others even before that. It's really interesting to record, to get to speak about Norwich. Often it's quite cathartic, particularly last season, I think we found. But and hopefully people still enjoy it, right? Which is why it's got to 500 episodes.
Yeah, I suppose so. That joint pain element was probably what made it successful last season as well. But no, I feel quite bad sort of summing it up, given I've probably contributed to around 1% of the podcast generally. But no, I always enjoyed it as a listener. Always used to be a go-to if I needed something to listen to long form. So no, it's fantastic to be a part of, and it is quite weird in this job generally. I don't think most people in their jobs go into something that they've consumed daily for their lives, but for me, every time I write an article, it would have been me on the other end reading it, and it's the same with this podcast. Every time I speak, it would have been me listening. Had it been somebody else, so in that sense, a bit annoying that it's taken away an hour's entertainment for me every week. I don't want to listen to my own voice as much as I wanted to listen to the rest of you. But no, I'm very glad that people enjoy it, and obviously we really appreciate the support, as we do with all the content, not just the podcast. And as long as you keep enjoying it, we'll keep doing it. So looking forward to 500 more.
Absolutely, serenaded by an ice cream van as well in the 5. We will do something at some point, I'm sure, to properly mark this. It's a little bit tough, as you can understand, in the cut and thrust of the Championship, where games are relentless. We see more of Dean Smith than we do our own families at stages, and this is kind of the beginning of a period where we're about to, pretty much between now and the end of August, have games every Saturday or Friday and then Tuesday. So it's going to be quite tough, but we will try and do something at some point to mark it. Not exactly sure what that is, but yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure if this podcast is the equivalent of Tom Naylor's tackle on Timu Pukki, but we'll try and avoid that. Anyway, that seems like a nice place to end the show this week. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for listening to the 499 podcasts that came before this. Of course, all of the content on this weekend's game is available PinkUn.com and the PinkUn Plus app as well. You can get a free trial for that to unlock loads of exclusive content. If you go on PinkUn.com, there should be a tab in the top left that says PinkUn Plus. You can sign up for a free trial now to access all of that, not just written stuff as well. Sam does an excellent tactics board video every week. Adam does terrace talk every week, where we get insight from opposition fans. There's plenty in there to indulge upon, obviously, as we embark into what is going to be a really heavy period of Championship football. Let it commence. Thank you very much. See you soon.